In recent years, PlayStation has been making an effort to bring its popular recent titles to PC, such as Spider-Man, God of War, and Horizon. This has been a practice I'm all in favor of. If you know me, you probably know that PlayStation has been my console of choice every generation since I first got a PS2 in the early 2000s, but great games getting an even bigger audience is great news as far as I'm concerned. My PC is actually where a vast majority of my game time takes place since I'm already working from there all the time, so it's pretty easy to just boot up a game and play it instead of hooking up a console. So a quality PC port makes games more accessible for me to replay than if they were only on console, and why bad PC ports, or just bad re-releases in general, make me pissed off. But anyway, PlayStation has given me a review code of their latest PC release, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, which was first released on PlayStation 5 back in 2021. This is a model example of what I was just talking about. I played Rift Apart on PlayStation 5 the weekend it was released 2 years ago, and I even gave my thoughts on it in a spoiler-free video too. But I never got around to playing it more than once, despite the fact that I thought the game was really strong and one of the contenders for best Ratchet and Clank game, a series I've loved since I first played the second one on PS2. Now that Rift Apart is on PC, I'm excited to get the chance to revisit it and see how it handles and how it stacks up to playing it on PS5, which I sampled for the video. To cut to the chase, I think Rift Apart on PC is a good port, but with that comes some things I do have to mention. And I think that's kind of a thing with PC games in general. I find new PC games difficult to give an opinion on because everything I say is relative to the specs I have, which are on the screen right now. When reviewing a console game is more of a set-in-stone experience that every player will get, thus being easier to give my opinion on. My hardware is a couple of years old, and my GPU and CPU need an upgrade at some point in the future so I can stay up to date when playing the latest PC releases. But having said that, I thought Rift Apart was good. So I'll start with the good things. I thought the settings were all really easy to tinker with. I played the game at 1440p and turned many settings down to medium, like hair and shadow quality, while also turning off things like upscaling and turning the texture quality on low. And when I did that, the game ran pretty well in the heat of the action, and by that I mean platforming and combat. In those scenarios, things were pretty smooth. Inputs were responsive, I was usually getting 60 frames per second, and I just felt like I was playing the game on PS5. If you want to get the full PS5 playing experience, the DualSense controller is fully compatible and thus giving you things like the adaptive triggers and the haptic feedback. Though I just play PC games with an Xbox Series X controller, so I did that while playing this. When I first landed on Sargasso, the frame rate dipped a bit because of the lighting and foliage around me, but it was still far more than playable. The issues I ran into with this had nothing to do with the gameplay side of things, but were more technical. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart was an impressive demonstration of what the PlayStation 5 could do. It took advantage of the console's solid-state drive to be able to load things in nearly an instant. Switching planets was lightning fast, but then the game's whole gimmick of interdimensional travel was built around the SSD. The first level of the game, the parade route of Megalopolis, had Ratchet and Clank flying through the city at a high speed and then instantly being warped to another location with entirely different assets to show players just how much the PS5 was capable of in loading data in ways previous console generations could only dream of. When you place that game built around the SSD on a PC, things get complicated. If you have a good SSD in your computer and install Rift Apart onto it, this won't be an issue. I was today years old when I learned that it's evidently a controversy if this game actually requires an SSD or not, so I tested it out. I first installed the game on an external hard drive, but then on an SSD to see if it caused a difference. The game's specs list an SSD as recommended, even if it could boot on a hard drive. With the hard drive, loading became an issue. As I said, things were loading and running just fine when in the stages. The Rift tether mechanic actually worked really well. But then the whole Rift switching thing was when the hard drive could not keep up. First, the game takes a bit to load on boot up, like games did on PS4. But then when playing the part of the opening where Ratchet and Clank go through multiple rifts, it takes a really long time. As in, over 30 seconds as Ratchet freezes in place. When this exact same thing took 2 seconds on PlayStation 5. I thought the game wasn't working right, only for him to land where he was meant to after like 40 seconds. Across the board, loading was the singular issue I had with this port when playing on a hard drive, like how loading would cause the game to buffer in high-speed sections or slightly delay the timing in some cutscenes. But I must circle back to what I said earlier, in that PC gaming is a very individualized experience. The game was just designed for an SSD, and when I used mine, the game loaded significantly faster, which is honestly an understatement. There's not much space on my SSD, so the PS5's SSD is faster, but when playing the PC version with mine, it could keep up with the loading on PS5 just fine. The extra wait time is pretty small. The boot up was quick, loading levels is quick, and so are all the Rift mechanics. My game didn't buffer at all, and the cutscenes and sounds were perfect. So my conclusion is, the game should definitely be taken at its word that an SSD is an essential part of the game. I've seen it run okay on some hard drives and YouTube footage, but mine was not one of them. With all those facts established, would I recommend Rift Apart to PC players? If you are a PC player who's yet to try the game out, I'd certainly say it's worth a go. Rift Apart offers a fun and action-packed platforming experience that has a ton of content and replay value with a cinematic story that has top-quality production values without falling into some of the pitfalls experienced by some of the older games in the series that shot for those same ambitions. It's a really strong game, and if your PC is up to snuff, even at the minimum settings, I think a good time will be had. Even for those who are new to Ratchet and Clank. The first level gives new players a recap of the essential bits of information from older games, and the narrative teams Ratchet and Clank up with new characters to flesh out their origin story, which doesn't require any backstory to understand at all, while also not undermining the existing cast. It's just a really good game, what more can I say? Well, I guess I could say more, given the fact that when it first came out on PS5 I promised a full review of the game, but I'll get to it at some point. We all know I'd have to redo the future games first, and I also never reviewed the later PS3 games at all, so yeah. Generally speaking, I hope PlayStation eventually broadens the amount of games that are coming to PC. That would obviously take time and care to do right and would be an investment, but I think these classic franchises are worth it. Sure, Rift Apart is a good starting point for new Ratchet players, but I'm confident that people would also love to spend their money on Ratchet's whole saga if they were given the ability. PlayStation Plus is a good PS1 emulator and has some iconic games put on it like Resident Evil 1 or Twisted Metal, but I'm thinking that having a great way to play PS1, 2, and 3 games on PC would strengthen the PlayStation brand by generating more interest in IPs old and new that are also getting PC ports. But that's just the ramblings of a longtime PlayStation fan. That's my 2 cents on Rift Apart on PC, so thanks again to PlayStation for giving me the review code, and as for the regular subscribers, I'll say this, Arkham Origins is still going to come out as regularly scheduled on Friday, so look forward to that. But in the meantime, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.